Welcome, everyone. As he just said, I'm going to talk about some applications of artificial intelligence technology. I'll talk a little bit about the grander goal of AI, creating thinking machines that are as smart as humans and ultimately even smarter. But I'm going to focus mostly on some specific applications of AI technology to study biology and to understand how to make human beings live much longer than we currently do. And this specifically is work using AI to study the genetics of these flies, which are called superflies, which live 5 times as long as regular flies. We hope by studying them we can figure out how to make people live a lot longer as well. So AI's superflies and the possible path to immortality. Click. Hold on. Well, the path to immortality is the clicker doesn't work. Does it work now? And now it works. All right. Okay. So let's start again. The premise underlying this work I'm going to talk about is that for many intents and purposes, we can think of the human body as a sort of complex machine. And that may not be all there is to it, but I think it's enough of the story that we can go a long way with that understanding. But it's a very complex machine. The human mind has trouble understanding all the complex networks and processes inside the body. So software programs, in particular artificial intelligences, can be very helpful to us in better understanding how the body works and how to make it work better. So the big challenge facing biology now is complexity, complex networks. We have amazing imaging tools to understand what's happening in the brain and the bloodstream and all the systems of the body. But these imaging tools generate vast computer files indicating huge, complex, interconnected networks of genes, proteins, organs, microorganisms. These networks, they baffle the human mind. They're hard for us to understand because when you come down to it, human beings evolved to live in the jungle like animals, or to live in the savannah. We evolved to mate, to seek food, to run and hide from predators. We did not evolve to analyze complex networks on a computer. Our brains are not well suited to these kinds of analysis tasks. Computers should be able to do better. And this basic challenge of biology manifests itself in well-known problems for the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, if you average the cost spent on drug development over the drugs that reach the market, you come out with about $1 billion in research for each pharmaceutical that reaches the market in the U.S., which is where the majority of pharmaceuticals come from. And I mean, this is a real limiting factor on the path toward making humans healthier and longer lived. The reason the research is so costly and time-consuming is the complexity of the underlying biological networks, which we as human beings are relatively poorly suited to understand. Longevity research, as a specific subcase of biology and pharma research, faces the same problem. I mean, the things that make us get sick and die are complicated, and there are many challenges to longevity research. We've identified many mechanisms underlying human aging, but each one of them accounts for only a small percentage of what makes us die. I mean, there's heart disease, there's neurodegenerative disease, there are problems with DNA repair mechanisms as we get older, but there's more and more and more different problems. Each one of them is a little bit of the story. There's not one kind of critical aging process that kills us all. It's hundreds or thousands of problems in different parts of the complex networks. One approach that my friend Aubrey de Grey has taken with his project SENS, S-E-N-S, Strategies for Engineering Negligible Senescence. And if you go to sens.org, that's really interesting stuff. What Aubrey is after is fixing the damage. Basically, just send in special cells, repair molecules, inject stem cells, do things to repair the damage that is incurred by aging. And I think this can work to some extent. I mean, I'm 43. I wouldn't mind some young stem cell injections myself. But The problem is all these things have side effects. So when you inject something cool into the body, it may fix one problem, but may cause other problems. And unraveling the chain of causation underlying these side effects, again, is very difficult because of the complexity problem. And a slightly subtler notion, which is important for aging, is what the biologists call by the nasty phrase antagonistic pleiotropy. And you can Google that if you want. But what it means is our bodies have some things that adapt us well to age 10, some things that adapt us well to life at age 20, some things that adapt us well to life at age 30, some things adapt us well to life at age 40. But all these adaptations affect the same genes, because each of our genes does many things. The older we get, the more these different adaptations that the same genes have to different stages of life interfere and mess with each other. So our body gets more and more confused, trying to do different things as we get older. And by the time we're 70 or so, all these different adaptations for different stages of life have left us less fit overall than we were when we were 20 years old. And again, there's complex networks intersecting in complex ways. So if we want to increase human health span, and that word is carefully chosen, so increasing lifespan in itself isn't necessarily a great thing if you're going to be in poor health and unhappy for thousands of years or hundreds of years. But if you can increase health span, healthy lifespan, and be the way you were at 20 or 30 or 40 for a long time, that becomes a lot more appealing. And an increasing number of biologists feel this may be possible. But if you're going to do it, it involves thoroughgoing changes in multiple interlocking biological networks. It's not a simple thing, and we need some pretty creative research methodologies to address the problem. So my own side of this is using AI technology to analyze complex biological networks. But I've been working on this together with a company called Genescient, which is based in Irvine, California. And what Genescient has done is to evolve long-lived fruit flies. So through 30 years of directed evolution, just letting the longer-lived flies mate with each other preferentially, 30 years of directed evolution, we get flies that live 4 to 5 times as long as regular flies. Now, you might say this is a really, really annoying thing because flies are a pain. We don't want them to live longer. We would like to kill them all. But, of course, from a scientific perspective, if we can understand why the flies live so long, maybe that can help us understand how to make people live longer. And I've been working with Genescient, applying AI technology to understand why these flies live so long and draw lessons from that may be helpful for extending the human health span. One thing that's interesting about these flies is not only do they live 4 to 5 times as long, but they are also healthier and smarter than regular flies. So they have very strong hearts. So that the top line, the dark line, is regular flies. The lower line is the long-lived flies. It tells you what percentage of them die when you electrically shock them. So we take these poor, innocent little flies that never harmed anyone, and we zap them with electrical charge, and we see how many of them die. And the long-lived flies survive electrical shock better than regular flies, so which means their hearts are more robust. They have better cardiovascular systems. And this is actually important because this is among the top killers of human beings as they get older is cardio disease. So the fact that the long-lived flies have better hearts is suggestive that studying them may be helpful to combat heart disease. So the flies also mate more. So that the superflies have more sex than regular flies. So they live longer and have more fun. They cannot yet read the newspaper like this guy, but we need a few more generations of evolution to get there. And this picture has nothing to do with my talk. I just like the picture. It's a cool-looking guy. So, getting back to the serious stuff. So, what we did here, we looked at the genes that act very differently. They're expressed differently. So the genes do very different things in the long-lived flies versus ordinary flies. And then we look at SNPs, which is single nucleotide polymorphisms, mutations that are known to be associated with human disease from studies of human beings. And we can see there's a lot of overlap. So there's a lot of genes that are differently expressed in the superflies, and those genes are also known to be associated with diabetes, arthritis, hypertension, heart disease, Crohn's disease. So we can see there's a lot of stuff that's different in the superflies that is related to human disease, which indicates we're probably on the right path. Actually, there's 1,200 genes that act significantly differently in the long-lived flies versus the ordinary flies. And this bespeaks the complexity of the underlying biological networks, because that's a lot of genes. And of the 1,200 genes that are different in the superflies from the normal flies, 800 of those genes have direct orthologs. They're directly analogous to human genes. So there's a lot of information about humans here, and 120 of these genes have already been verified to be related to human disease. Probably many more of them are also related to human disease, and we just don't know it yet. So clearly there's very complex biological networks underlying a complex data set like this one with a lot of information about longevity. How can we gain more insight into these data sets? And this is where I think AI has a lot to offer. Both the relatively simple forms of AI that we have now and can bring to bear now, and the more complex forms of AI that, as an AI researcher, I'm working to develop. And whenever I talk about AI, I like to carefully distinguish two different kinds of artificial intelligence. On the one hand, there's what I call narrow AI. This is the creation of machines or software programs which can carry out specific tasks particularly well, say, play chess really well, or find web pages really well, like Google does, or drive a tank through the desert really well. These kinds of AI programs can be incredibly helpful, but they're not flexible in the same sense that human beings are. On the other hand, humans have a kind of general intelligence that lets us confront new problems that were never anticipated when we were born. And the quest to make AI programs of this nature is what I call AGI, or artificial general intelligence. The creation of programs that can solve a variety of complex problems in a variety of complex environments. And a real AGI program should be able to solve a problem that its programmers never heard of, like thinking on its feet if it's a robot, or its virtual feet if it's a program. And narrow AI is well developed now. AGI is still in the early stages. I think we're going to need both of them to really grapple with biological complexity, and I'll come to that point in a moment. So among my various pursuits, I have a startup company called BioMind, which is specifically focused on applying AI to analyze complex biological data. And for those of you who are programmers, we have an open source project, OpenBioMind, which you can find online on Google Code, which is some narrow AI code, some machine learning and logical inference code specifically oriented to help analyze complex biology data sets. So what did we find by applying the OpenBioMind narrow AI code to the Superfly data set? Well, one thing we did is to narrow down the 1,200 genes to a few dozen genes that seem to be particularly essential for achieving longevity. And we looked at a complex graph of which genes are related to which other ones and try to find genes that are hubs of the network. So what are the control genes underlying longevity? And there seem to be a few dozen. There are thousands of genes that are related to longevity, but there's a few that have more of a central controlling role. And if we can understand those better, that of course helps a lot in figuring out how to make drugs and foods and other therapies that can help people to live longer. So a lot of this stuff is going to be published in early 2011, so I can't say the details now. And Ganeshan is actually looking to develop new drugs to aid human longevity based on this research. But some of the stuff I can't talk about publicly is these are some supplements. I mean, these are things many of them you can buy at the vitamin store or order online. And I'm not a vitamin salesman, so I'm not telling you to go out and take all these pills. But these are substances which are closely linked to the control genes of aging and longevity, according to our research. So if these substances act on proteins which are coded for by genes, which are critical in the longevity of the superflies. So there's probably something interesting to look at there. And most of these are also already thought to have something to do with aging, which is encouraging. So one of the things we're trying to do is find new substances, design new drugs and foods that will help even more than these things. So the results I've talked about so far are based on what's called gene expression data, which is data on how much a gene is doing in the fly. What we're now doing is gathering what's called gene sequence data, which measures the mutations in the long-lived flies. And that is data I'm analyzing right now, which should be published in early next year. But the current AI technology only scratches the surface. And I think what we need to really progress further is an AGI, a artificial biologist, an artificial scientist that can think through the problems on its own rather than just serving as a data analysis tool. And this ties into another open source project I'm involved with, which is OpenCog, an open source project aimed at artificial general intelligence. And again, you can find out about that at opencog.org. The philosophy underlying it is in a book I wrote a few years ago called The Hidden Pattern. And I have a book coming out early next year called Building Better Minds. It goes into the detailed theory underlying it. It's a complex architecture with different kinds of memory and different learning algorithms. I can't go into that now, but what we're doing with OpenCog primarily is using it to control virtual agents in virtual worlds, like a virtual dog that I'll show you in a moment, and using it to control a humanoid robot as well. So this is actually a project that I've been doing in my AI company, Novamente, for a while, and that I'll now be doing here at PolyU together with Gino, where we've gotten grant funding to apply OpenCog to control intelligent video game characters. And in Xiamen University in China, we're working on using the same OpenCog AI system to control this little humanoid robot here, which is a different sort of challenge. And, hey, click. Can you get the video to roll? There we go. So this is a video of an AI-controlled virtual dog, which is stuff we've done in my AI company. So the dog is controlled by an AI. Human beings are controlling the women. So basically, this is a simple example of learning by imitation and reinforcement. So the women are going to play fetch, and in the chat window that appears sometime at the bottom of the screen, they're basically saying, hey, we're playing fetch together, look at us. And the dog is supposed to watch, see what they're doing. Then when they say, hey, dog, you play fetch, the dog realizes what fetch means because it watched them, and then the dog will know how to play fetch. And this is in a virtual world called Multiverse, which is an online virtual world product. The little thought bubbles there are something we drew on in the Paint program, which just shows some of the knowledge inside the AI's mind when it sees the environment, but the rest is just screen captured. And what... Bad dog. It just sat there. My dog does that, actually. Now it's trying a different internal procedure. Maybe it'll get a little less stupid and bring the ball back. Woo! Good dog. Everyone praise the dog. All right. Good dog. Now it knows it's a good dog. It'll remember that was right. Hopefully it'll do the right thing again next time. So my hope over the next 5 to 10 years is that this very simple general intelligence that we're using to control virtual dogs and using to control the humanoid robot, that we can put together this kind of rudimentary, commonsensical understanding from these robotic and virtual embodied agents, that we can put that together with the very useful narrow AI that we and others are doing to understand biology data and do other kinds of science, by piecing together the primitive general AI and the domain-specific narrow AI. Hopefully we can work toward an early-stage virtual scientist. And it's not really going to have Einstein's head in a robot body, although that wouldn't be a bad thing, but it's probably not the direction we're going in. But to be able to do science on its own and have an AI that can win a Nobel Prize based on its own thoughts and efforts, and that's what we're working toward. I think it ultimately will be possible, but of course there's many steps to be taken. But I do believe that one day, I hope within my own lifetime, we'll have artificial biologists that can understand all the complex networks inside the body. Because as I said earlier, the human mind is built for different kinds of tasks. If we have an artificial mind, which is engineered to have general intelligence analogous to humans, but to be specialized for interpreting complex data sets, I think that system can make a lot more progress. And to my mind, that's the best hope we have of living for, say, 150 or 150,000 years with the health of a young person, and hopefully with all sorts of interesting improvements and enhancements to our natural state as well. So coming back to the message I started with, I think it's a valuable perspective to look at the human body as a complex machine. Our modern instrumentation can unravel the complex networks inside that machine quite well. Our human minds are flawed at interpreting the data that we gather. And as AI develops from narrow AI toward AGI, it can help us more and more to understand what goes on inside our bodies, which can help to combat disease and extend healthy life.